Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Do you think people ought to clean up after themselves or not? Do you think if they make a mess, they should pay to have somebody else clean it up if they can't do it? I think most of us agree that that's a good idea.
Okay.
The general principle is if you make a mess, clean it up, and you're responsible for it, right? Well, um, now suppose you don't like the notion of taxes. I'm talking to the audience, Craig. Suppose you don't like the notion of taxes. Well, I can understand why people wouldn't like taxes, but suppose we say it's not really a tax, it's a fee. It's charging you for the cost of cleaning up after you. Would that seem fair? I think so. Well, I'm going to have a conversation about that idea with a good friend who's in California. This is Craig Smith. And Craig has a book that he's co-authored with a guy named Bill Fletcher, and it's called Reaching Net Zero. It's about global warming. And you can imagine what we're going to talk about, cleaning up after yourself when you make a mess with carbon, right? Okay, good morning, Craig.
Good morning, Matt.
How are you?
Thank you for having me on your show. Again, it's a pleasure always to talk with you. And you've had some previous discussions about carbon fee from some of my California colleagues. In fact, Mark Tabbert, a very knowledgeable guy. He's one of the key figures in the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is advocating, trying to get the US Congress to do something about global warming, in particular about a fee on carbon.
Mm-hmm. What's your angle on carbon fees?
Well, first of all, let's talk about you started to bring this up in your introductory remarks, but why do we want a carbon fee, or why a carbon fee at all?
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing is that which you also hit upon is that if you're polluting the atmosphere or polluting the earth, and your product is the cause of the pollution, then you should be responsible for doing something to remediate it or clean it up.
Yep.
And that's one of the underlying reasons behind having a carbon fee. And also, as you indicated, nobody likes taxes, and I avoid using the term tax. I like the term fee because there's a subtle difference between a fee and tax.
Mm-hmm.
A tax is something governments impose. They collect revenue from taxes, and that's used to operate the government. The fee is an entirely different thing. The fee is to recover the expense of remediating and cleaning up the pollution.
Mm-hmm.
There's another subtle difference with the concepts of a carbon fee that are being proposed today, and there are many variations on it. There's not any one answer, but they all have in common some means of returning some of the money to lower income people who might be affected by a rise in costs of gasoline or electricity or heating oil or gas for their homes and so on. The measure that Mr. Tabbert was speaking about is called House Resolution 763 in the US Congress, and has a fair degree of bipartisan support, although it's primarily supported by the Democrats. But it would return 100% of the monies collected through a carbon fee to the population, to every taxpayer, in accordance with their level of income, meaning that low-income families, based on their tax return, would get a higher return, a higher dividend, as it's called in the law, or proposed law, than somebody who's in the upper tax brackets.
Now, let me stop you, because you just told me something I didn't know. I didn't realize there was already a bill before in Congress that would start a carbon fee. Is when did that happen? And how come I don't know about it? And what are the prospects? I mean, I'm sure you're going to tell me that anyway, but
Well, no, it's this was introduced in the last Congress, actually, by a Republican and Democratic member of Congress. The Republican guy was from Florida, which he had concerns about sea level rise and things like that. And so the way they did it before this last election was they had a committee, and they increased the committee every time they could get one Republican and one Democrat. So they increased it two at a time to maintain a bipartisan approach. And they got up to about 80 members on that basis before the 2020 election. Regrettably, in that election, the Republican guy lost. He wasn't reelected. So the whole structure of this committee changed, and the name or number of the bill changed slightly, but it's basically been in progress for a number of years. And I think there are 4 different bills in Congress. Some proposed strictly by Republicans, which have very limited scope. HR 763, which we're talking about now, has the broadest support and the biggest support basis. Many outstanding economists and other people have come forward to support it. So we're hopeful that it in some form will go
So
forward.
wait a minute, you've got 3 or 4 different bills that all have the same intention, but they're worded differently, and the implications will be different, or what?
Yeah, the emphasis or the effect, let's say, the usefulness,
Okay.
I could be cynical, varies considerably. This is by far the most broadest approach, most effective, sweeping scope, as it were. And I'll talk a little bit more about the details of it later on. But I wanted to mention a few other things why a carbon fee is important. Globally, right now, it's estimated that we spend about, this is the entire world, about $5 trillion in subsidies to fossil fuels. And this varies from country to country, but a lot of poorer nations actually subsidize the price. So gasoline costs $4 a gallon. It's only $2 a gallon for the public because the difference is paid by the government.
Wait, don't slide past that number. You said 5 trillion.
In the US, cash subsidies for fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, and coal amount to about $20 billion a year.
Okay, now hold on. Let's go back to this 5 trillion, because somebody
Okay.
else told me that, and my jaw dropped. That was about a year ago when I heard that, and I thought, you're kidding me. $5 trillion in subsidies to the fossil fuel industry.
Right. Oil, natural gas.
I told me was an honest man, but it is such an astounding amount of money. The idea that they would, who came up with that figure? And what kinds of things does it cover? When you say it's a subsidy, what all is covered by a subsidy? Is that like pipelines that they're paying? They're paying the cost of building the pipelines, or what is it that they do to subsidize the fossil fuel industries?
Well, it's primarily production. And there are no doubt other subsidy, and there are incentives in some countries for pipelines. For example, I'm sure in China, the government decides they need a pipeline, they just take the land and build it. But the primary thing are tax-related measures. For example, well known in the petroleum industry is what's called an oil depletion allowance. That basically is a tax credit that is for per every barrel of oil you extract from an oil field, you get a certain tax credit. It's like a depreciation number, in other words. So when you can't produce anymore from there, then you don't get any more credits. But it amounts to a huge subsidy. And
Well,
there's,
why I don't want to hijack your conversation. You've got a place where you want to go with this, but I can't help stopping and saying, how the hell do they get away with doing that? Doesn't the public ever have any whatever it takes to stop a stupid thing like that? I mean, why over the years have we built up a situation where these big companies get that kind of subsidy for providing something that should be provided, on the same basis as any other commodity? If you can make it profitable, then good for you. If you can't make it profitable, well, somebody else will do a better job of it for you. That is what capitalism is supposed to be. But it sounds like you've got something that isn't capitalism, even the
well,
virtues of capitalism, and not talk about the disadvantages of it. But we don't even get the benefits of capitalism if they go around subsidizing companies to the tune of $5 trillion a year.
yeah, that's across the whole global economy.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a significant number. I mean, even in the United States, I mentioned when you stepped out from it, it's $20 billion a year. Now you can picture a poor country in Africa, and somebody comes in and says, well, we want to develop some offshore oil properties here. We're going to invest, we're going to create jobs, but we require a tax holiday of 20 years so we recover our investment. Those are the kinds of things that can, there's so many different variations. I can't really enumerate them all. But to the bottom line, having a carbon fee would tend to level the playing field. Then you'd see gas and oil and coal being produced at their actual cost, rather than some subsidized lower cost. That would make electrical energy generated from renewable sources like wind and solar immediately more competitive. They don't get that kind of subsidies. There have been in the past subsidies for nuclear power, but not anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm glad they've cut that off, but okay.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of other things they haven't done they should do.
Yeah.
We won't go into that. So number one, it would level the playing field. Now, actually, in the case of coal, right now, solar and wind power generating electricity are cheaper than coal-fired power plants. And this is brought to light by India's recent experience. India is one country that's continuing to try to build coal-fired power plants because it's got coal. But there are solar and wind installations going into India that are generating power cheaper. And so you're beginning to see these coal plants are becoming obsolete. They're becoming stranded assets. They can't compete. They can't pay back their loans. And it's going to be a big problem.
Well, it's a great problem. I think it's terrific. If coal companies can't stay in business, hooray for them.
Yeah. Well,
why is that such a bad problem?
That's happened on a dramatic scale in the United States. And the our previous president talked a lot of big talk about bringing back the coal industry, but coal is just, nobody's building new coal plants in the U.S. So you can't get financing, you can't get insurance, and utilities that have coal-fired power plants are phasing them out as fast as they can because they can't generate electricity on a competitive basis. So,
well, okay, so it's hard on the workers, it's hard on the coal miners, and I feel sorry for them, but I don't feel sorry for anybody else. Good for us. I mean, that means we're going to switch over to renewables quicker, doesn't it, Craig?
Yeah, so that's part of the benefit of having a fee on carbon, is that we can speed up the investment in renewable sources.
Great.
So I guess I started to talk about the difference between a fee and a tax. And just go back to that for a moment, that a tax is really a levy collected by the government for its own purposes, and this fee is for the purposes of benefiting the general population.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many of these bills have different ways of determining how to pay the fee. We're preferring a very simple, straightforward approach, and that is that the fee would be levied at the coal mine or at the wellhead. So coal companies, oil companies, natural gas companies, they all have, by government mandate, requirements for monitoring production. So production figures are widely available and basically unquestioned. So if you know, for example, that a given coal mine produces X thousand tons of coal per month or whatever calculating basis you want to use, then you know how many tons of carbon dioxide that's ultimately going to put into the atmosphere once it's burned up. So for example, 1 ton of coal, metric ton of coal, on average, there are different grades of coal, but on average emits 5 metric tons of carbon dioxide. So you could use that number and determine, okay, that's going to produce this much carbon dioxide. It's going into the atmosphere. So
hold on, wait a minute. That sounds like mathematical nonsense to me. How can a smaller number produce a bigger number of the same thing?
Oh, it's a very good question. Well, carbon dioxide is 1 atom of coal. I'm sorry, 1 atom of carbon, which is what coal is, and 2 atoms of oxygen, CO2. 2 atoms of oxygen weigh 48 units. Carbon weighs 12 units. So CO2 has a molecular weight over 2.5 times that of coal itself. So you get more carbon dioxide by weight than you do just carbon and coal.
Huh.
Does that help explain it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Now, a barrel of oil roughly emits about 1/2 ton of carbon dioxide, and all these numbers are well established and well. So if you do it at the wellhead and the mine, then there's no middleman, there's no questions, there's no monkeying with the figures, there's no game playing. Mm-hmm. And we think that would be the best way to do it. Then you'd also have to have a fee on imports. So in other words, let's say, Canada has a very strong carbon fee program. It's been going on for several years.
I don't think it looks like what you've just described, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, I'll come back to that then. So let's say Canada has this program and they have a fee. The current year, I believe it's just went up to $30 a ton, I believe. Mm-hmm. So let's say Canada is going to import oil or coal from the US. Well, they're going to impose a border tariff so that the coal, oil, we don't have a carbon fee. So our suppliers would be undercutting Canadian suppliers who have a fee. So the idea is that every country would have some kind of border adjustment if imports come from a country that is not imposing a carbon fee to, again, level the playing field, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But we could also say, well, why not subsidize renewable energy? And there again, it's the same reason why subsidies aren't good. First of all, you'd have to have money from the government to subsidize them. And then you get in a situation where you have all these game playing that goes on with different constituencies. And it's obvious if you look around a little bit, it's very difficult to get rid of subsidies.
Yeah.
Our current situation with the fossil fuels is one example. Another example, priceless example in my mind, is ethanol. So the US government tried to encourage farmers to grow corn to produce ethanol to reduce imports of gasoline during the energy crises. Well, now you can't get rid of those
Yeah.
subsidies.
Well,
And
excuse me, Craig, but I think that's just part of the whole problem of not being able to get rid of any kind of agricultural subsidies. Because
what about
that
the
the
product?
worst
Yeah,
example of what happens when you subsidize anything is the fact that the US subsidizes agriculture so much. Maybe Canada does too, I don't know how much. But once you get something on there, you feel like you're depriving people of their food if you cut it off. So it should never be started. I agree. Yeah.
and there's a lot of technical reasons too. I won't take time to go into that. Why adding ethanol to gasoline is an inefficient way to
Okay.
avoid import.
But now they know, they already know that that ethanol is not the way to go, right? I mean, biofuels in general are not the way to go. Is that is that fair to say, or is that an overstatement?
Well, it's fair to say in a way, it all depends on the origin of biofuels. So if you can produce biofuels and you're not using natural gas or something to do it, doing it with solar generated electricity that's cheap enough, then that's going to be a way to go. We're seeing movements in that direction. So, pardon me. So to implement this, there should be in the example of countries like the US and Canada and so on, there should be a uniform way to do this across all the different states or provinces, so you don't get different situations where people could take advantage of it. We favor the idea that the money would come to the government. There'd be a special administration for remitting a portion of this to people based on economic need and necessity and income level. But the majority of the funds should be used, in our opinion anyway, for important projects that benefit global warming, reduction of global warming, like improving the national electric grid. There's a lot of things that need to be done in that regard. Making low-cost funds, loans available to responsible parties who want to build wind farms or solar farms, expanding the availability of charging stations for electric vehicles. You can go down a long laundry list of things. Now, there was another thing I heard about just recently that was being proposed, which I thought was quite interesting. And I don't know how this much applies to other countries, but in the US, if you buy a gallon of gasoline, there's a significant portion of it that's composed of state taxes, and every state has different taxes, primarily used or supposed to be used for maintaining and building the highway system. And then there are federal taxes, federal gasoline taxes that were originally imposed to build the nationwide system of freeways. Well, we could get rid of that federal tax on gasoline, in my opinion, and that would equal out or equalize any impact of rising costs due to a carbon fee. And the offset, I mean, the difference in revenues for the government could be easily recouped by the carbon fee. So that's an interesting idea. That would appeal to a lot of people, I think, to say, oh boy, we do this, we create 200,000 new green jobs, we start reducing pollution, get rid of greenhouse gases, and we get rid of the damn federal gas tax.
Yes. Oh boy. Well, I'm already enthusiastic. Although I'd have to say it depends on how well you publicize the notion that people will be getting something back instead of just paying the tax. Because now, for example, I believe in British Columbia. Of course, in Canada, most of the carbon fees, if you will, or carbon taxes are administered by the provinces. It's said that, you provinces, you can decide how you want to do this, but if you don't do it at all, the federal government will do it for you and slap something on anyway. So
Yeah.
BC has been doing a carbon tax for some time now. But when I talk to people out there, I tell them, look, you get the money back, yeah, and they do. But I think people are not aware of it. They still think, well, we're paying this big tax, and if we get rid of it, that would be, it'd be right back in our pockets. But in fact, they are getting something back, and I think the problem is people don't know it, and it's not in selling the idea. You really have to explain it to people why it makes sense that if you just take money out of their one pocket and run it through this fee thing and put the same amount back in their own pocket, it would still be beneficial to the world because it would give them motivation for cutting that about down the amount of carbon they emit.
Yeah.
And you have to explain hard to get that notion into people's minds.
Yeah. Well, my understanding, I don't have a detailed understanding of Canada, and you probably do, but
No, I don't. I know one thing that I would add though about the Canadian situation. I've been reading that I think it may be coming up to the Supreme Court or something like that. Some of the provinces want to claim that the federal government doesn't have any right to do this,
yeah.
to make this deal. Of course, part of the Paris Agreement is Canada commits to doing this. And the question is, if suppose what will happen if the Supreme Court says no, the federal government doesn't have the right to do it? Well, it would be one hell of a blow to
Yeah.
global, to the whole climate crisis. Yeah.
Well, my understanding of the Canadian government's approach is to the provinces. This is what you have to do. You have to impose a fee on carbon. Now, if you want to come up with your own way to accomplish the same effect, then you can do that. And you just have to show us that you're doing it. So I think some provinces have gone to a cap and trade approach. I know there's I forget now which provinces, but there one or more provinces in a partnership with California. California has its own cap and trade system.
Yeah.
Cap and trade has a lot of problems with it. It's not effective. It's subject to gaming, and hopefully people are going to gravitate away from that and go to straight fee.
Yep.
It's called the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act in Canada, I believe. And bless Canada, you guys are way ahead of the game. Started this a number of years ago. And
I don't think we're doing great, but would because of course we might boast a little bit about that, but we have to take the shame of the oil sands development, which is, and all these pipelines going on and stuff. Canada is not a better society than the U.S. in that regard at all.
Well, yes, but you're not alone. Every country's had those kinds of problems. But I looked up for Canada's fiscal year 2019-2020, carbon fee collections amounted to the 2.8 billion Canadian, roughly 2.1 billion US dollars. So that's nothing to sneeze at. And that was based on the initial price of $20 per ton. I believe this year it's now $30 per ton.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's Canadian. I'm not sure if it's Canadian or US. I looked up the numbers, but so that seems to me to be a very positive sign, and hopefully your Supreme Court will have its supreme wisdom in the right direction.
Yeah, I don't know really anything about that Supreme Court thing. I sort of half made that up, but I know there's something going on.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising, but so where does a number like $20 a ton or $30 a ton or whatever, in other words, how should we price carbon removal, a carbon fee? Well, to me, the essential thing would be to say, okay, you put this stuff in the atmosphere. Now, people getting sick is a big public health problem all over the world. And believe me, from air pollution, there's a huge public health problem. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about it. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's huge.
Mhm.
And it could be totally eliminated by converting to solar, wind, and electric generation, electric cars, and other things.
Mhm.
Maybe not totally eliminated, but eliminated down the points where it becomes a nuisance instead of a major plague. Well,
Well, let me toss in one little caveat, because you could eliminate a lot, but this is just a side issue, and I don't want to distract you, but a lot of health issues occur in poor countries because women they cook inside, indoors, and the
yeah,
smoke
right.
in their house is a major public health problem.
Yeah.
And if they were able to get a clean source of fuel, um, and this is usually cited by people who are trying to promote biochar,
Hmm.
that you could use waste twigs and cardboard boxes and things like that to make biochar, and use that indoors. That would reduce the health effects of cooking indoors with smoke. Anyway, that's a side issue, but I guess what you said was it would eliminate all the courses of the effects of air pollution. Well, it would
Sure.
eliminate the ones that are caused by cars and stuff like that, but not cooking indoors, right?
Yeah, airborne pollutants that cause lung disease and asthma and so on, and that eventually fall out and contaminate water supplies, abandoned oil wells, abandoned coal mines, and pollute water supplies. There's a whole series of things that could be addressed with the carbon fee revenues. But anyway, back to my point. How do you determine a fee? Well, there's no large scale successful economic way to suck carbon out of the atmosphere other than trees. But to do it on a giant scale, which would be necessary to really,
Not just trees, but any agriculture.
and agriculture,
Good,
right,
good agriculture.
right. But there are laboratory tests and small pilot plants where they're experimenting with basically sucking air through a mechanical processing system, collecting the carbon dioxide, compressing it, and then storing it underground. And preliminary estimates are that that would cost somewhere between $100 and $200 a ton
Mm-hmm.
if you could come up with an economical source of energy to power. These would have to be giant plants to get across the world, have a significant effect. So I won't even go into how much power it would take theoretically just to run enough plants to reduce the atmospheric concentration by 1 part per million. I mean, the fuel bill alone would be huge because you're going to have big compressors and fans running. Anyway, I don't want to get off on that tangent, but so let's assume that at least $100 a ton it would take in the future sometime if we had cheap energy and the right technology to suck carbon out of the air.
Well, look, I mean, to be fair, David Keith, who runs this operation, a pilot plant out in VC, says he can do it for $100 a ton now. I don't know. I don't think anybody believes that could really be done at scale, but and I don't believe there's anybody who takes that as a realistic thing for some of the reasons you've given. But it's not pie in the sky.
No, it's not pie in the sky, but it's a mammoth technological challenge to scale it up to the point where it would have any meaningful effect. I mean, to me, it's like a Manhattan Project or something like that. What it took
Worse, yeah.
nuclear weapons. It's a huge challenge. So if you say, okay, that's what the cost of what it's going to take, even just let's say $100 a ton is a good number, then we should have a carbon fee of $100 a ton. Mm-hmm. So we collect the money to pay for undoing the problem. Well, if we started tomorrow and imposed a $100 fee on carbon, it would have serious economic effects through most countries, probably all countries to a greater or lesser extent. So we don't want to do that. But the plan and what Canada is doing and what these bills in the US say and other countries are talking about is to implement it gradually and to give credit to other methods. So if a country has a certain target for reducing greenhouse gases, and they can do more of it by improving energy efficiency or some other measure, then they can delay the implication or the imposition of a carbon fee. So there's some latitude that could be employed. But in the US, the studies, I'm trying to, yeah, 40 at $40 per ton. The economists say that that would increase the price of gasoline by 33 cents a gallon. Coal would go up about $80 a ton, but nobody cares about that anymore because they're not buying coal. Natural gas, a couple dollars a cubic foot. Well, here in Newport Beach, where I live, about 2 months ago, the price of gasoline was $3.05 at my local station. And that was kind of typical of the average for Southern California. Today, it's gone up almost 80 cents in 2 months. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. All the oil companies lost billions last year. I've been looking at the annual reports. Exxon, $20 billion loss because of the pandemic. And so now we're slowly beginning to emerge. There's more travel, more airplane flights. People are driving to visit relatives they haven't seen for a year. So the oil companies are making up for that. They're jamming the price up. So, you know, when you think, and I haven't seen anybody picketing the gas stations or marching in the streets. Well, you know, our gas just went up 80 cents a gallon. So I can't imagine.
You know, that in itself, isn't that shocking? That,
yeah.
you know that the theory about capitalism is that competition is going to keep the price and the costs in some sort of reasonable relationship. But if you can just say, well, let's just double it this time, or let's just I mean, it proves the whole theory is screwy.
Well, the gas station, our local gas station, I should say that I'm quoting, it's not a Chevron or a Shell. I can see they're a few miles away. I go by them, and they're another 50 cents higher than that. They're over, over $4 now. So anyway, and we hear this story in the summer. Oh, well, the gas prices are higher in the summer because we had to close the refinery for maintenance. You know, come on. When the travel requirements are the highest, and you know, suddenly the prices are the highest. So, well, I don't want to get off on a side story here, but I hope that the idea of a fee on carbon will move forward. So far, but besides Canada, there's about 40 other countries in the world that have imposed a carbon fee in some form or another. Last time I looked, Mexico had one, in fact, at $1 a metric ton. Not much, but symbolic in a way. The highest, as I recall, was Sweden. It had $139 a metric ton.
Wait a minute. 130. I thought you said that the maximum would be $100 a ton.
Well, that's a milestone, let's say.
But they've exceeded the milestone.
Yeah, they're going hard at it.
Okay, so Sweden is really.
Sweden is not a huge user of fossil fuels.
Okay, now what's the result? Are they having the kind of effect that they want to have? Has it really got people to being careful about when they turn on the ignition of their car?
Well, that would be one desirable effect. Yeah. I don't know what kind of political reaction has been in Sweden to that price.
Well, apart from this political reaction, the whole purpose of it is, well, maybe a bigger purpose of it anyway, is to tell people don't use your car because it's so expensive.
Or get a car that gets better mileage.
Yeah, well,
Use
or
public
both,
transportation.
yeah.
Or ride a bicycle and improve your health.
Hmm.
I guess just in I think there's very definite benefits. Bill and I, in our book, Frank, imposing a carbon fee is the second most important thing that the United States can do.
What would be the most important?
The first and the most important thing is educate people. People have to understand, number one, that it's a real problem. It's not a hoax. It's not, nature. And it's something that has to be done about it. And it's happening now, and we can't wait. So
Well, yeah, that's the hard thing, because you and I are trying to do it right now, and I don't know how many people will listen to us. So that's the problem. People have resistance. Okay, now you think you've finished your whatever you wanted to say, but I have two questions that come up out of what you've said. One is, matter of fact, is kind of a side question, but we were talking about trying to get people incentivized to stop using their car as much. In Peace Magazine, the issue that's just about to go to press, I have a new feature called Controversies, Current Controversies. And I'm asking people in different parts of the world to talk about a dispute that's going on in their network. And my friend Joanna Santa Barbara, who's in New Zealand, said that there's a dispute in her family. She doesn't say which side she's on, but I think I can guess. I believe it's her husband who said, we should get a new electric car. Look how much we'd be doing for the world by cutting back on emissions. Wouldn't that be a real contribution? And she, who has a different way of thinking, I believe, is the one who says, no, we ought to use up the old car, because the old car the old car is their, of course, gasoline car, and it's getting old. And she says they ought to run it until it falls apart and then get an electric one, because she says it takes so much emissions of carbon to manufacture the car that buying a new car, electric or not, is prohibitive and is deleterious. So she's on the side of letting everything run down until you can't use it anymore before you replace it. Do you know anybody who's made any calculations about that? Who is right, Joe or her husband?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't have any definitive analysis. I could see how that could be done, and it would be a complicated process. But there's a big difference between electric cars and internal combustion engines that leads me to believe that, well, I know right now a number of automakers have already set a date where they're not going to make any internal combustion engines cars anymore, period. The manufacturers are saying, we're not going to do it. Now, if you compared a Tesla, say, to a Ford SUV with a 300 horsepower motor, the Tesla, of course, would get the equivalent of 100 miles per gallon on electricity. But the big difference is in the engine and the transmission. The car is much lighter. They don't have all the steel components. They don't have this big mammoth gasoline engine, all these castings and steel and aluminum. The transmission, it has 4 small electric motors, got a battery, big battery. But the complexity of the engines and the number of components in an electric vehicle compared to internal combustion engine is staggering. I don't know the number, but let's say there's 5,000 parts in a traditional car, and an electric vehicle has 2,000, some big difference like that. I just made those numbers up, so okay. They're not correct. But I was surprised to find out what a difference there is. So, and the electric vehicles are coming out with computerized systems that control the operation, and certainly safer. They have more safety systems, more intelligence in how the engines operate and respond. Um, so I think there's something to be said for the fact that the manufacturing costs ultimately in terms of the parts and the greenhouse gases produced in manufacturing an electric vehicle versus manufacturing an internal combustion engine, I think has to favor the electric vehicles.
All right, very good. Certainly, if you're going to build two, one car electric and the other one not, then you'd choose the electric. But if you're talking about running down your old car before you throw it away, that's maybe different kind of calculations because that car already exists. Anyway, yeah. So I'll have to, the other thing that you've just raised in my mind is I never heard anybody talk about this, but I used to have Volkswagens, and I got in a couple of crashes, and boy, that thing didn't hold up very well, And I'm thinking, look, if you're talking about a much lighter weight car, is that going to be a safer or a more dangerous car in a collision?
Well, I said lighter, but I didn't mean less safe. And I don't know the answer to that question.
I never heard anybody talk about it, and maybe it's not an issue. I don't know.
I haven't seen anything that indicated that Tesla's vehicles, for example, have been any less safe than any. They have so many built-in features now. If you get near somebody or you're going too fast, you get too close by somebody, they automatically put on the brakes and they beep and tell you slow down. I mean, there's all this stuff that it's amazing. I have a Prius, which is not electric, it's a hybrid. Yeah. Back out of the garage the other day, my wife's talking to me and I wasn't paying attention. We have a narrow alley and all of a sudden the brakes go on. I didn't do anything. And well, I had just approached the neighbor's trash can out in the alley behind me. Didn't hit it, the car stopped automatically. Anyway, so there are things like that.
Okay.
But
now there's another question that came up as we were talking about this direct air capture system that some of the people are developing, where you're going to suck the carbon out of the air and either put it underground, or I think the David Keith approach is they're using it to make a new fuel, which would make it just carbon neutral, but not carbon negative. Anyway, I have a friend who did some calculations. She's a physicist and said, that's never going to pay for itself, just as you did. She's very skeptical about the future of that kind of operation, doesn't think it'll ever work enough to make it worthwhile. But she's very enthusiastic about something that nobody else pays attention to, which is carbon capture, all right, but it's not carbon out of the ambient atmosphere. It's capturing stuff coming out of smokestacks or that sort of thing. So you at the place where the stuff is being emitted, you capture it. And my impression is, from everything I've read, that people have said that it's too expensive, and it means that if you make manufacturing really green, it's going to be very, very expensive and non-competitive. But she keeps finding things that look hopeful about capturing carbon at the source of emissions, which is different from what this operation in BC, and I think there's one in Switzerland or someplace too that does that. What do you think about that? Have you any reason to think that maybe that has some real promise?
Well, I think it certainly has more promise than direct air capture. Because the source, if you're at the source, it's not diluted like, once it's in the atmosphere, it's diluted by, I don't know, 1,000,000 to 1 or something. So you have a more concentrated off gas to deal with, and it would be easier to compress it and collect the carbon dioxide by various chemical means, and then store it. But it's certainly going to be capital intensive. It's going to make the power generated by that conventional plant, it would be a fossil fuel plant, or you wouldn't be doing it, more expensive. And the likelihood is that that plant's going to be phased out at the minimum in 40 years, probably sooner if it's an existing plant, because after a 40-year life, roughly, they're all going to be phased out.
Mhm.
So it would seem in many ways not a very cost-effective investment. Now, I could see where natural gas companies would push that because they'd like to say, well, we can keep building these gas-fired plants and we're going to have this method and we'll suck this stuff out and no problem. But I don't think in the long haul they'll be able to compete economically. They have trouble competing right now with subsidized natural gas versus wind and solar, which is generating electricity, clean electricity at the same or sometimes slightly lower price, definitely lower than any coal plant. So sell your coal stocks. That's my investor's advice to you.
I see that you left out in this last sentence, you didn't include nuclear in the comparisons. And we've, I had a talk with your friend Bill Fletcher about nuclear and so on, about, well, he's doing this book review of Bill Gates, who is still plumping for nuclear, and saying that we cannot get there in time through just trying to switch over to renewables, that we have to include nuclear in the mix. And I think that's a very troubling issue that needs to be addressed more fully, don't you?
Yes, definitely. I think Mr. Gates has done a great service to mankind with his personal investments and his book and what he's written about. But I think I disagree with the future of nuclear. I'm an old nuclear engineer, so nothing I would have thought better than to have more nuclear plants. But I just don't see it in the cards today, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I don't think it can be economical unless there's some radical change in what we do. And to say, okay, we're going to build new, safe nuclear power plants starting tomorrow, they're not going to, it's just like sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. It's going to take 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
It takes 5 years when things go well to license a new nuclear plant in the US. And if you're going to start from scratch with a new design, you're not going to get it approved, at least here, in less than 5 years. Mm-hmm. Just do tests and be sure it works. So, and how fast can you build them? I mean, we've been building one, the only one under construction in the US for the last 5 years or so. It's already like 5 years behind schedule. And,
which one is that?
that's in Southern companies in the South. I forget the name of it right now.
Okay.
It's 2 units. I don't know. It's $2 billion or $4 billion over budget and a number of years behind schedule. Mm-hmm. There was another plant that was started and it was ultimately canceled. I think it was Georgia Power had it. So it's just horrible obstacles to think of suddenly bringing online a whole bunch of new nuclear plants. Like, where the hell would you put them? Who's going to tolerate having them as neighbors? You have to have cooling water. There's a whole lot of issues that I just don't see happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think that's a whole different conversation. In fact, I have that conversation over and over again, almost every week, about nuclear power, and here in Toronto as well. So this part has been very enlightening. I've learned some stuff today. I hope some other people will watch this and learn it too, because you've got your numbers and they make sense to me. So thank you very much. It's been fun again.
Thank you, as always, for having me. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And good luck. Keep doing what you're doing.
All right. Well, you do the same. And we will be back in touch and have another conversation about something about global warming in another month or less. Okay?
All right. You got it.
Take care. Bye, Craig.